You know how when you're really hungry, you go to the fridge to get just what you're hungry for, but you get there and you open the door and all you see is some moldy bread, milk that's turned into cottage cheese, and a few bowls of whatever that was from however many years ago?
What do you mean, the stuff that's been in the back of the fridge since the ideas for Frontlines were conceived? Apparently, the folks at Impressions had a fire in their R&D labs and lost all of their new ideas. But their shipping department needed something to do, so they went and found every old idea that was spared from the fire and put them all in this one game.
Front Lines is a hex-type war game that takes place in the all-too-familiar, not-so-distant future. It involves tanks, hovercraft, artillery, and lots of old ideas.
What I don't understand is why Impressions went to the trouble of making this game at all. Maybe it was so their 3D artist would have something to do after that fire. The opening battle sequences are impressive, albeit rather long, but the void left by the lack of something new had to be filled by something.
Front Lines contains 33 pre-designed scenarios. At the beginning of each scenario, you can accept a default deployment of your troops, or redeploy them however you want. You then go where every hex game has gone before. Now, if I could only remember why these guys were fighting in the first place.
The R&D people that were lost in the fire were the only ones that knew, and it seems that they didn't tell anyone else. The folks that were spared, needing some kind of storyline for Frontlines, looked at what every other game in history was doing and came up with the "in the future, Earth will be divided, and factions trying to take control will do battle to the death" scenario.
At least the survivors know how to program games. In and of itself, Frontlines isn't a bad game. The graphics aren't bad, and the gameplay is pretty easy. There are two phases, movement and combat, and the interface, while not super, does seem adequate.
What frustrates me about this game is that with all the hex games out there to draw from, this game should have been better than it is. If it wasn't for the nice animation at the beginning, I'd swear I was playing a game from about 3 or 5 years ago.
For example, during the movement phase of the games, each unit has a certain number of movement points that enable it to move a certain number of hexes.
Hey, what a great idea. Who came up with that?
I think Moses did a few thousand years ago. Anyway, the screen tells you how many spaces you can move, but there's no easy way of telling where your reach ends.
No shading where you can go or anything like that?
Nope, you're just sitting there counting the hexes on the map. It gets old after a while.
What's really mind-boggling is that the combat phase of the game does show what your firing range is by shading in red everything out of the selected unit's range.
If that's so, why does it show targets that are not in my line of fire as being part of my range?
Who knows? If your target is behind a hill or some other obstacle, the screen still shows that it is in your range. It only tells you after you've clicked on it that it isn't in your line of fire. If you have 20 targets that are in range, you have to click on all 20 to see whether they are or aren't in your line of sight.
What were the folks at Impressions thinking on that?
They weren't. That's obviously what the development people lost in that fire were paid for.
When the programmers were looking at all the other games out there for ideas, they must have looked at some of the good ones. They did include a healthy number of options that you can use to customize your game. That's a good thing.
You're not kidding, that's a good thing. After about 2 minutes of listening to that music, I was hunting for the music off function.
This game is just full of weird anomalies that I'm surprised weren't noticed during playtesting. Frontlines uses animations to move the pieces from one hex to another. It's an okay touch to the game, but after a while you just want to skip it and get the pieces from one place to another without watching your tank slowly roll through 12 hexes.
I found the animation off option, but guess what? Your units still travel through each individual hex on their way to their destinations, and at about the same rate as when animation was on. The piece would simply pop from one hex to the next without rolling through the intervening space. My jaw hit the floor from this weirdness.
There is a map editor included in Frontlines. With it you can edit maps to make them anywhere from 20 by 20 to 100 by 100 hexes large. You can also place terrain, and even change what values the game uses to conduct combat, such as the percentage of shots that will actually hit.
I thought that was a nice addition to the package. The editor really gives you room to work. You can edit most any variable involved in the game.
When it comes right down to it, though, the question again arises. Why did Impressions go to the trouble to make this game? It's already been done to death many times before. If you already own a hex-type game and you're reasonably happy with it, there is no reason at all to go buy this one.
And if you don't own a hex-type game and you think you might like one, there are other games out there which, well, make more sense than Frontlines. This is a game which has nothing at all new in it, and what is there isn't much.